A few years ago, I had a job as a customer service representative for a local retail store. The job mostly consisted of answering customer call questions regarding products or sending the call to the appropriate department if we couldn't help them over the phone. I worked with one coworker mainly, and we stayed in sort of a makeshift office that was very dimly lit in the back of the store. I'm going to avoid naming the retail store or my colleague, just out of my own personal feeling of security. I'll just call him John. I worked with John for a number of years, nearly 3 years actually, and over those years, as he became more and more familiar and comfortable with me, he opened up and told me stories so creepy and horrific, all I could do is stay quiet most of the time and absorb the disturbing things he was saying. This story is just one of the experiences John told me about. For a number of years, John worked at a hotel as the hotel's manager. The hotel was quite large and very, very old, requiring a lot of maintenance, which John sort of doubled as the groundskeeper as well as the manager. Because of the state of relative disrepair and the age of the hotel was considered more affordable to, say, an apartment or a house. And most of the guests at the hotel were actually tenants that stayed for months or if not years, most of them being elderlies that made the hotel their home. John would tell me that after working at the hotel for only a few months, he discovered that in most of the hotel rooms, there were these large vents or grates that were air intake for the air conditioning systems. These grates were quite large, definitely large enough for a full-grown man to fit into, and at times he would have to fit in them in order to repair them. It was during one such repair that John happened to notice that inside the grate, instead of just being a boxed off area like some of the other rooms, this one had a hallway or a passageway behind it. Upon investigating the passageway, John found that it actually led to several of the rooms throughout the hotel. In total, this passageway behind the grate and behind the wall led to approximately 6 to 7 various rooms. He explained that upon discovering this, he went back to his own room, only to discover that behind his own grate was one of such tunnels, and it, in fact, interconnected with the other rooms he had seen. He explained that after this discovery, he would take off his shoes at various times during the day or night and creep around inside of these tunnels and look through the vents and spy on tenants in the various 6 to 7 rooms throughout the hotel. He explained some of the most bizarre and twisted spectacles you can imagine, but one in particular really disturbed me. One of the tenants John focused on was an elderly man whose coming and goings were very ordinary, to the point of being suspect as to how mundane they were. He didn't seem to have much of a life at all. He would leave and he would come back, scarcely ever with anything in his hands, aside from the occasional shopping bag from going to the grocery store. John would go on to tell me that out of all the tenants, for some reason he seemed very focused on this gentleman. One mid-afternoon, when John was in the lobby of the hotel, he saw the older gentleman leave the hotel. He knew this was an opportunity to get into the walls and wait for the man to return, to spy on him and see what he was up to. He sat in the duct in the walls, looking through the grate for more than an hour, when finally the elderly man returned with a bag in his hand. The bag turned out to reveal nothing more than a few onions and a few other goods from the grocery store. But one of the things that had John fixated on this gentleman is that he always dressed nicely in a suit and slacks, yet he had nowhere to go. John impatiently watched the man put up his groceries, sit down on a chair in the living room, and watch some TV. And about the time John was considering going back to his room, he noticed the older gentleman was fumbling inside of his coat pockets. Upon closer inspection, he saw the man take out several wads of cash. These were not small wads of cash. These were stacks of bills, possibly in the thousands of dollars. He watched in astonishment as the man pulled out 4 stacks of bills from his coat and set them on his bed. Luckily, the rooms were small, so John was able to see through the living room into the man's bedroom that he was placing another suit on the bed from his closet. He then took the stacks of bills and proceeded to place them inside of this other suit. It was the way he was placing the stacks of bills in the suit that was so fascinating. He wasn't just putting them in the suit pockets. He was actually taking scissors and cutting the inner lining of the suit, placing the bills inside, and then sewing the suit back up, after which he would put the suit back into the closet. At this point in John's story, he stopped and had a very uncomfortable smirk on his face, the kind of smirk to let me know he was very proud of himself for what he had just discovered. He told me that after seeing what the man had done to his suit, he became even more fixated on him and spent every free minute he had in the walls, in the passageway, looking through the grate, just waiting for the man to return. He was hoping to see if he has other money that he was sticking in other suits. Sure enough, after about 2 weeks, the man would return, remove a few more stacks of bills from his suit pockets and sew them into yet another suit before putting it on a hanger and placing it into his bedroom closet. John went on to tell me that he continued watching him for several months, and over the months he counted over 6 suits that the old man had filled with cash. He realized this man was stockpiling his money, hiding it away in his closet, sewing it into his suits as some sort of secret savings account. Now John had an even bigger grin on his face and told me he was just waiting for the perfect moment to steal the man's money. The biggest issue with stealing the man's money was as soon as he did it, the old man would surely suspect someone from the hotel. The suits would be missing, his money would be missing, and yet there would be no sign of a break-in. There would be no outsiders that could have possibly come in and taken his money. That would be extremely unlikely. No, he would certainly expect someone from the hotel. So this was the biggest problem for John to solve. He watched the old man for weeks, but he did not retrieve any more money. At this point, John was getting very impatient. He wanted that money now, but he couldn't figure out how he should do it. One evening, John slipped off his shoes and slipped into the grate in his room behind the walls and followed the passageway to the old man's room. He peered through the grate and saw that the old man was laying on his bed. He peered through the grate at the man for hours until finally John became exhausted and went back to his room. The next morning, John woke up, ate breakfast, went out and tended to a few of his hotel duties, and then went back to his room and snuck into the grate, slipped behind the wall, and went to the old man's room. Looking through the grate, he was surprised. It was by then late afternoon, but the old man was in the exact same position, lying on the bed. John only had time to watch the man for about an hour before returning to his duties for the hotel, but during that hour, the man simply slept. At the end of John's workday, he returned to his room, slipped into the grate behind the wall, and followed the passageway back to the old man's room. He looked through the grate. To his great surprise, the man still slept. He watched the man again for hours. The man slept. By this time, he had slept more than 24 hours. It suddenly hit John. This man is dead. But could it be true? Might he just be sleeping? He had to know for sure. In all the months of him watching the old man, he never once slept this long. He was confident the man was dead, but he was not absolutely sure. John returned to his room and decided he would wait another 24 hours. If the man was still in the same position, lying on his bed, he would assume he was dead, go and check, and then rob the man blind. John told me that all day long, all he could think about was that man in the room and all that money. He barely got anything done, but he knew he had to tend to his duties and wait out the day so that he had enough time to be sure that the man was deceased. His workday was finally over and he returned to his room. He immediately locked the door and opened the grate and went behind the wall and followed the passageway to the old man's room. He looked through the grate And there he was, in the exact same position. Now, John was confident the man was dead. He pushed the grate to the man's room open and let himself in. He went and checked the man on the bed. His eyes were wide open, and he was pale. John was convinced he was deceased. He then took all of the suits, which numbered 10, and crammed them into the grate behind the wall, and eventually snuck them all back to his own room. At this point in John's story, he had another smirk on his face, this one a little more maniacal than the last. He told me that at this point, he waited 2 additional days and then began speaking to other tenants, voicing his concern that he hadn't seen the old man in several days, and that perhaps we should check on him out of concern. He then, of course, went and checked on the man, only to find him deceased, and reported the unfortunate man's demise to the authorities. After hearing John's story, I had to ask, "How much money did you find, John?" He would only say that it was a lot of money. I pressed on and said, "If it was a lot of money, why are you working retail? Wouldn't you just retire and move to the Bahamas?" John's only response was to say, "Well, that was a long time ago, and you know, money spends." The entire story was disturbing, and knowing John made it even more so. But one aspect of this story disturbed me more than the rest. It was the unspoken part of the story. That little seed of doubt in my mind that kept bothering me. Did the man die of a stroke or a heart attack? Or did John kill him?